Hello and happy Monday. Today's Coffee with a Therapist is brought by the Venti Iced Chocolate Almond Espresso from Starbucks. I actually have been doing pretty well about mostly going to local places, and that's usually and still my favorite jam. But lately, I've gotten back on the Starbucks kick, and yes, they've gotten me back with their shaken espresso chocolate situation they have going on. I'm about it. So this Monday morning is fueled by coffee from Starbucks. And I'm grateful to finally kind of wrap up my thoughts about the Ultimatum, Marry Them or Leave Them on Netflix, and just kind of give you a bit of perspective, a little bit of what we call edutainment on just what I've observed clinically, what I've observed just as a human, and let's dig into it. I've watched all of the Ultimatum at this point, and I think the big picture view of all of these characters is that they tend to fall on one end of the spectrum or another when it comes to their emotional health and the emotional ways that they express themselves. Some of them are more on the avoidance side, and they're not really dealing with stuff. Some of them are on the anxious side, and sometimes they end up projecting that onto their partners, and these are the people that are more vocal, might even be considered obnoxious. And overall, I just want to give a brief overview of what I think this show actually did for these couples, if it was a good idea or not. Not that anybody could say 100% this was a good idea or not. And ultimately, what the Ultimatum did was it put these couples in what we call almost like a pressure cooker. So anything that was going on in their relationship, it just added that extra pressure and tension, and it was just going to create movement one way or the other. Again, I don't know if that's necessarily good or bad, because sometimes it just creates movement and people are still struggling with whatever mental health and relational health things brought them to that place. And then they just kind of counter transfer it into the next relationship or the next thing that they're dealing with. So it's not necessarily that bringing pressure to a situation is going to heal it. It does shine a light on things. And so I was thinking about how it's really interesting they have these shows and they don't incorporate anything when it comes to mental health or therapists. These couples, the things that they're struggling with, the things that they're bringing to the table are from their own lens, the struggles that they've had as kiddos. I mean, we saw that. I appreciate that Zay was really honest and real about his stuff. However, he definitely hasn't dealt with it. He's at the space where he's vulnerable, and I want to applaud him for that. But there are a lot of things that he has to work through before he's going to be the emotionally available and healthy person that he wants to be. And so I think in all these couples, I think I just saw glimpses of how their childhood or relational trauma or the ways that they struggle are being brought into these relationships. And although it's okay, let's put a spotlight on it, that doesn't mean that it gets healed. And putting a spotlight on it doesn't mean that people are actually in a space where they're able to really step into it and start working on it. Now, it could be the first step. The thing is, that's, I think, where people are this could be a good thing, and I want to give that credit. It could be the first step if people are really ready, willing, and able to do that. For the people who are kind of, again, dragged on this show, like Jake, quote unquote, I don't think they're ready for it. And when people are not ready for it, we see this in therapy too. If you're not ready for it, you don't do the work until you're ready for it, until you're really bought in and it makes enough sense to you. And I think people get really confused about this in relationships. They're like, I want them to change for me, or, they'll change because they care enough about our relationship. And ultimately, it's actually more important that people change because they believe in that change themselves. If it's based on the relationship or you, that is not solid foundation. And in fact, that can actually be healthy or unhealthy. So it really shouldn't be about the other person. People shouldn't be dragged into change. It really like the change we see the most difference in, and where there's genuine movement that isn't just like moving from one bad relationship to another bad relationship, is when someone's actually there, ready, willing, wanting to work on their stuff. And nobody can determine that but ourselves. So for all the people that were dragged onto it, and even for the people that said they were ready for it, there was a lot of languaging around, I want them to do this for me. And so when you hear that, or at least when I heard that, I was like, this isn't really about the relationship. This is about this person and their anxiety and what they don't want to deal with and what they don't want to work on. So, I mean, April and Jake are a really good example of this. April was the person that wanted him to change for her and like to be on her page. It wasn't really about the relationship. She wasn't really ready to face and deal with her stuff either. She wanted Jake to change. And Jake was dragged onto the show, wasn't really his space or place to like want to work on things. And so I'm not surprised that ultimately that didn't work out for this couple. I think for many of the couples, I don't know that this process actually healed or helped them get through what they needed to heal relationally and in their own personal development. Therapy does that. People being ready, willing, and able does that. And even like, I think one of the biggest things too that people forget about is it's so important that when we're in a healthy space that we really lean into the belief that I don't want to be with somebody who doesn't want to be with me. Or, people would say, oh, I really want this thing. And it's like, okay, well, if you have really come to terms with that and that's really something important to you, you wouldn't force another person to want that too. Like you'd really just want someone to meet you in that. And if they can't, although it's super painful, you'd be able to say like, this is just where I'm at. I mean, you have your right and I have my right. It's not that someone's right or wrong. I think people make it like right or wrong, especially like when it comes to like wanting to have kids, that whole situation. It's not that. It's just saying that you're different. And it's honoring, and like I think it can be more loving to say like, if we're different and this is like really like a big thing, a big foundational thing for you, which I think for all of us, we have a couple of foundational things and that's okay. Now, if your list is super long, that may be about you. But if you have a couple of foundational things, I think that's fair to say like, it may be more loving to say like, look, you don't want the same things that I want, and neither of us like can really quote unquote compromise in this, and that's okay. And I think that the most loving thing I can do is to say like, let us choose partners where we both don't have to compromise something that is so foundational to us. In any relationship, we will have to work through things and figure things out and communicate and all of that, but ultimately really coming to the truth that you're not really wanting to be with a person who isn't a good fit for you and doesn't want you in the ways that you want them. And I think ultimately the people that set these ultimatums, it was them having to come to their truth in that. Overall, I think all of these folks could have definitely benefited from therapy. Again, I saw them really falling into these like camps of either being avoidant and not dealing with their stuff, and sometimes projecting that onto others, or being anxious or even at times aggressive with how they wanted to deal with things. And again, projecting their stuff onto the other person versus really taking that lens and being able to say like, oh, this is the stuff that like I truly need to work on. I hope the silver lining was as icky and hard as it must have been to watch themselves back. Because I know for any of us, like we're not going to be our best selves when we're put in that pressure cooker, like an ultimatum. I hope that they were able to take from that. And I hope, if you're listening to this, probably not, but if you are, I hope they use what they do observe and what they are able to notice about themselves when they're in that pressure cooker and take that to a therapist. Say, look, this is a pattern of behavior I have. And like literally, you have visual evidence of it. One of the biggest times that I grew as a therapist was in grad school when I watched the video back. And it's so funny how much like what I thought I was coming across as and how I thought I was being in that moment was often not true. And I grew so much because of that. I hope they can grow from this. I hope that they can play those icky parts back, and as icky as it would be to watch it, like, they take that opportunity and they learn and they grow from it. Because as much as we're all here, like, being able to judge these people from our high thrones of not being in the pressure cooker, like, I think there's a lot of humanity in what they were going through. Doesn't excuse their stuff, doesn't mean that they don't need to work on their stuff and that there wasn't a lot of unhealthiness going on. But I hope they're able to take that, work with a therapist that is compassionate and specializes in relational trauma and can help them in this journey, help them acknowledge these parts of themselves and understand these parts of themselves and not feel shame. I think the one thing I saw a lot of when I noticed people not leaning into stuff and like being able to acknowledge their part in things or own stuff, or when they projected it onto the other person, I think the number one reason for that was shame. So I also hope for these people that they can work on their shame resilience and being able to say that it's okay for them to be human and imperfect. And in fact, being able to lean into the icky parts of them is going to help them heal those parts and not continue to project those parts onto other people in the future. So this is my synopsis. This is my hopes. This is my dog chasing after birdies in the pond area over here. And I hope you guys have a wonderful week. Please comment and subscribe if you want to hear more, and let me know if you have any specific questions. I would love to hear from you. Bye, guys.